Yep.
My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. After question period today, there is a possibility that the first hour will be spent dealing with second readings of various bills. At this time, there are 7 bills at the second reading stage, 21 in Committee of the Whole, 13 at third reading, and 19 private bills yet to be discussed by the House. If unanimous consent is not given for the first hour to be directed to government business, then the motion before the House will be that, as proposed by the member for Dunvegan, dealing with the matter of potable groundwater in areas where groundwater is desired by industry for an enhanced recovery of oil. At 4:30 today, the House will discuss Bill 211, Children's Access Rights Enforcement Act, as proposed by the member for Lethbridge West, who is also the Deputy Speaker of the House. The House will reconvene at 8 o'clock this evening for purposes of Committee of the Whole.
Let us see the awesome grandeur of the Rockies, the denseness of our forests, the fertility of our farmland, the splendors of our rivers, the richness of all our resources. Then, O Lord, let us rededicate ourselves as wise stewards of such bounty on behalf of all Albertans. Amen. Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Member for Drumheller.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with. Bill PR1, Royal Canadian Legion Alberta Property Act. Bill PR3, Paul, Mark, and Cheryl Lynn Mary Ibbotson Adoption Act. Bill PR4, Warren S. Forest Bar Admission Act. Also, Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with certain amendments. Bill PR2, Canada Olympic Park Transfer Title Act. Bill PR6, Old Sun Society Community College Act. Bill PR8, Rosebud School of the Arts Act. Bill PR12, Canadian Southern Baptist Seminary Act. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they not be proceeded with. Bill PR5, Patricia, Alexandra, and Marcelo Becerra Adoption Act. Bill PR9, Hungarian Cultural Society of Edmonton Act. Bill PR13, German Canadian Club of Calgary Act. Bill PR14, Austrian Canadian Society of Calgary Act. Bill PR15, Polish Canadian Cultural Centre of Calgary Act. I request the concurrence of the Assembly in these recommendations.
Does the Assembly concur in the report by the Honourable Member for Drumheller? Opposed? Carried. Notices of motions.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 21, I wish to give notice that I intend to move in Committee of the Whole that further consideration of any or all of the resolutions, clauses, sections, or titles of Bill 21, then before the committee, shall be the first business of the committee and shall not be further postponed.
Introduction of bills. Member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill being an act to amend the Individuals' Rights Protection Act. This act would amend the present act to include sexual orientation and mental disabilities as grounds not allowed for discrimination in accommodation, employment, membership in a union, and similar circumstances.
The honourable member for Edmonton Avonmore has moved first reading of Bill 262, an act to amend the Individual Rights Protection Act. Those members willing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 262, an act to amend the Individual Rights Protection Act, introduced by the honourable member, Ms. Lang, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table copies of the report of the Premier's Commission on Future Health Care for Albertans. This is the interim report from the Commission, Mr. Speaker. It's titled Caring and Commitment, a report on the concerns of nurses in the hospital and nursing home system. While I'm tabling these copies, Mr. Speaker, individual copies will be distributed to all members of the House.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to members of this Assembly 5 members of the lesbian and gay community in Edmonton. This week marks the celebration of Gay and Lesbian Awareness Week in Edmonton, ending with Gay and Lesbian and Gay Pride Day on June 27th. My guests are seated in the public galleries, and I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Member for Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later today we'll be discussing a most important bill, Bill 211. We have some very special visitors with us today, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to introduce to members of the Assembly. From the group known as MERGE, the Movement for the Establishment of Real Gender Equality, and the Children and Parents Equality Society. And later today, the Fathers Alberta Shared Parenting Association. We have some 66 members, Mr. Speaker, here to listen to that debate today, and they're seated in both galleries, and I ask them now to rise and receive the welcome of members of this Assembly.
Member for Edmonton Mill Woods, followed by Edmonton Belmont.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and to the other members of the Assembly this afternoon 51 students from the grade 6 classes at St. Clement's School in the riding of Edmonton Mill Woods. They're accompanied today by their teachers, Leonard Tanis and Michael Engel. They're seated in the public gallery, and I'd ask them to rise now and receive the very warm welcome of the House.
Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure today for me to introduce to all members of the Assembly 20 students from the McLeod School, which is located in the constituency of Edmonton Belmont. They're accompanied by their teacher, Miss Susan Kobowitz, and parents, Mrs. Joan Pankey, and Mrs. Patchinen. They're also accompanied today, Mr. Speaker, by the parent of the teacher, Mr. Kobowitz. I would ask that they all rise and receive the warm traditional welcome of this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, when this government brought in closure on second reading of Bills 21 and 22, the government House leader said at that time the reason for using the government majority to shut off debate was so that this bill could move to committee, Mr. Speaker. And he said at the time that the opposition will have plenty of time to debate the fine points of the bills when they go through clause-by-clause study in committee. What hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker.
Shame.
And my question is to the Premier, will the Premier indicate why this government has decided to undermine the integrity of its House leader and trample the rights of New Democrat MLAs in this legislature by cutting off debate in committee stage before it's virtually started?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, we're not doing that. We are allowing the legislation to pass through the stages that are required in the legislature. I should draw to the honourable member's attention there has been a considerable amount of time spent on this legislation, and a considerable amount of time will be.
Mr. Speaker, this is so undemocratic and so hypocritical of this government, Mr. Speaker. And I say in Bill 22, we had 18 government amendments passed. We had 1 day of debate. Is this Premier saying that's adequate when we're dealing with two major bills that affect working people directly? One debate in committee stage, that's adequate according to him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously the House will be dealing with this matter for 4 or 5 hours today, and that's longer than the government legislation in terms of the amendments took. Might I say, Mr. Speaker, dealing with this legislation, here are the pages of debates on this legislation in Hansard. Here are the pages, over 200 pages. This has been in the legislature since April the 15th that the legislation was tabled, and that was after 2 years of study. Then, Mr. Speaker, they had a lot of time. They had some 19 hours at second reading on these two bills, 19 hours in which all their debate was intended to do was to stall. If they wanted to take some of that time and put it into committee, then they would have had an additional amount of time. Now, after tonight, Mr. Speaker, there will be another 15 hours. 15 hours of discussion on this legislation. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable members wish to deal with legislation in a positive, responsible way, they will be treated in the same way by the government.
Mr. Speaker, what absolute garbage. Bill 22 amendments were brought in on Monday, and we had one debate on it. One debate, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say to you, this legislation affects all working people. And really, what it's doing, the point that we're trying to make, is it's tipping it over on the side of management. And I say to the Premier, isn't he being hypocritical to pretend that there is an opportunity to convince the House at the same time he engaged in the exercise of shutting down? I remind him, he said we'd have all time to debate this when we raised it in the question period. Now he's shutting down the House. What a hypocrite.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can use all the outrage or whatever it is he's trying to manufacture over there that he wishes. Here is the record in Hansard, Mr. Speaker. All of these are pages of the debate. Now, whether they mismanaged their time, that's their fault. I'm sorry. Because, Mr. Speaker, the House has spent a tremendous, probably more than on any piece of legislation before in history. So the honourable member has only himself to blame.
Mr. Speaker, this totally undemocratic government has grown arrogant. It can't stand opposition. That's the reality, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of Alberta are watching the contempt that they hold with legislative democracy. My question is, what is the hurry here, Mr. Speaker? These are major bills. Is it because of the golf course, or is it that there is some other hidden agenda that they want to get out of here? Tell us why we have to get out of here so quickly.
The same day. Well, Mr. Speaker, again, he can feign all his righteous indignation that he wishes. Because, Mr. Speaker, the record is here. The hurry, this started 2 years ago. Now, Mr. Speaker, 2 years of study. A bill was put in a year ago to study. Then again introduced, allowed to sit in the House for some weeks, then dealt with. And again, the record is here. You can hardly stand there with a straight face and say you haven't had time to talk on this legislation when it is thicker than the Edmonton phone book. I mean, what kind of nonsense to get up here and try and act indignant after that kind of a record. If he was unable to manage his time correctly as a leader, that's his fault, not the government's.
Westlock, Sturgeon, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to get angry watching a government commit suicide, but nevertheless, to Premier, how could you possibly justify limiting debate to at least the representatives of 40 to 50% of the people of Alberta to 30, 35 hours that you're talking about, when the minister and his staff and his friends took many times that, 100 times that an hour is to go around the world.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was providing the base upon which we were able to deal in the House. But I come back to the honourable member when he says we're limiting debate. There is the record. It'd be different, Mr. Speaker, if we were dealing with something like this. But no, this is thicker than the Edmonton phone book. And to say that that is limiting debate is just nonsense. And the honourable members may try and act indignant if they like, but the record is there, and if they just deal with legislation in a positive, responsible way, they'll find that we can proceed through the House in regular ways. But if they want to merely stall and delay, Mr. Speaker, then the government has to act responsibly, because, Mr. Speaker, closure is as much of Parliament as the question period is. And people in our democracy over the years developed this process for the one thing that you need that process for, and that's irresponsible opposition. That's what you need it for.
That's what you got.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker.
Question.
Yeah, poor management. We'll see about management after, Mr. Speaker. My question is, though, on a very serious matter to the Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, Mr. Speaker. On two recent occasions in this House, the Minister declared his support for testing of lethal nerve gases in southern Alberta and declared his confidence in the federal government's handling of the matter. Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, the federal government has confirmed now an incident of May of 1986 in which two employees of the Suffield testing station were accidentally exposed to a deadly nerve gas. Mr. Speaker, fortunately, the two apparently recovered and are still employed at the Suffield station. Well, my question is to the Minister, with his consultation with the federal government, will he advise whether the Alberta government was informed of this incident at the time, and if so, what follow-up action was taken?
Mr. Speaker, the NDP asked the question in the House of Commons today of the Minister of National Defence, and
that's where they're getting
information was made available in that House. I haven't seen the answer that was given by the Honourable Minister of National Defence, but I have been informed of the fact the questions were asked in discussions with the acting chief of the Defence Research Establishment at Suffield, who has advised me of the circumstances of the incident, which took place within the controlled laboratory facility at Suffield, and which required hospitalization of two employees overnight for observation only, and no ill effects were shown to have taken place. At the same time, as a matter of precaution, other employees were removed from the facility until such time as the matter could be properly and effectively dealt with, and I'm told that that in fact was done. At the time that the incident did occur, no notice was given to my department that I'm aware of, although it may have been communicated to the Public Safety Division of the department, for which my colleague, the Minister of the Environment, is responsible.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I say to the Minister, it's interesting that the government is prepared to allow their federal conservative colleagues to keep Albertans in the dark about such a sensitive matter. I would thought that this minister would be aware of it, both in terms of his constituency, plus his important role as federal and intergovernmental affairs. But my question is a simple, straightforward one to this minister now. In view of this happening, is the minister now prepared to frankly abandon his complacency with regard to the health of safety of Albertans in relation to the issue of testing of deadly nerve gases on the Suffield Range?
Mr. Speaker, it is not a matter of being complacent. It is, however, a matter of relying on highly qualified, skilled scientists and technicians who are employed by the Department of National Defence and the Defence Research Establishment at Suffield. Mr. Speaker, that facility has been in place since the early 1940s. There have been thousands
of people employed there. There have been thousands of tests carried out on that facility, and quite recently, within the last few years, the facility was used for the destruction of stored mustard gas, which had been on hand in the hands of the Canadian Armed Forces, and were destroyed on that particular base because it is equipped to handle this type of testing. I should make it clear, and I want to make it perfectly clear, that we have indicated our support for the defense research establishment, and I emphasize the word defense because it is defensive testing that is done. Unfortunately, it is known that there are countries in the world that have large stockpiles of nerve and chemical gases, and the convention, which is hopefully going to be agreed to in Geneva, will result in a ban of this type of weapon. And I would hope that that negotiation, which Canada is supporting fully and backing thoroughly in those discussions, will eventually be carried out. Our country is not stockpiling such weapons, and we hope that those who are will be dissuaded from doing so in the future.
Mr. Speaker, it's nice that the minister is concerned about the defense establishment. I would hope they'd be more concerned about the safety of people in southern Alberta at this particular time. Now, Mr. Speaker, Professor Mark Hollingsworth, the assistant professor of chemistry at the University of Alberta, has recently written an article entitled Public Health at Risk with Nerve Gas Tests at Suffield, and I'd be prepared after question period to file 3 copies, Mr. Speaker. But his conclusions are frankly devastating, and he says, and I quote one line, "These releases constitute real and immediate public health threats to communities near the base, including Medicine Hat itself," unquote, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, is the minister now saying that he's prepared to ignore this warning, or is he finally going to make some serious inquiries on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, I am obliged to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for having provided me with a copy of the article in question, and I have indeed made inquiries with respect to the nature of the tests, and I have been informed by the acting Defence Research Staff, acting Chief of the Defence Research Establishment at Suffield, that he has copies of 3 scientific studies which are opposed in their conclusions to those cited by the Honourable Leader of the NDP just now, and I will obtain copies of those and make them available to him as well. I think it is important to note that I have been assured by the Minister directly, by telephone conversation and by correspondence from the Department of National Defence, that the safety procedures that were followed met all necessary standards, and that there were clearly steps taken whenever a live agent is to be tested, that all personnel are properly warned, notified, clothed, and in every other way protected from any unfortunate accident. And I would point out that, in fact, the test which led to the line of questioning earlier took place in 1986, and that there were no adverse effects demonstrated in any way as a result of those tests.
Mr. Speaker, in all due respect to the minister, Mr. Speaker, asking the defense establishment whether what they're doing is safe is a bit like asking the fox if he's adequately looking after the chickens. What do you expect him to say, Mr. Speaker? But Mr. Speaker, Professor Hollingsworth goes on to note that the life of deadly nerve gases in the quantities admitted to by the federal government is much greater than their ability to forecast the winds, Mr. Speaker, and he says that there really is no long-term research on these non-lethal doses of nerve gases. And my question is a very simple, straightforward. Rather than listening to the defense establishment, why is the minister prepared to be, I say, complacent and allow his constituents to, frankly, to be used at this point as human guinea pigs for this type of research?
Well, that is absolutely a ludicrous suggestion. It is quite clear that our armed forces in this country are serving this country well, and that the Defense Research Establishment is part of that whole process. I would remind the honourable member that he, along with other members of his party, have complained that we in this province are not receiving our fair share of the national defence spending. All one has to do is go back in Hansard to see the complaints that have been levelled at the government in question period and at other times. This is part of the defence of our country, and it is being done by highly trained, qualified scientists and technicians with excellent qualifications who could go anywhere in the world and obtain employment because of their qualifications and standards. And I would suggest that it is an unfair accusation to hurl at those people who are, of course, Canadians as well as the honourable member and I.
To Westlock Sturgeon supplementary, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, in view of the fact that there are at least 2 other military ranges in Alberta, Primrose and Wainwright, is the Minister aware, or I guess is it even possible that he is ever informed of their use of any of the nerve gases or poison gases in these other military ranges?
Defence Research Establishment testing is only carried out, according to the information provided to me, and I believe it, on the Defence Research Establishment at Suffield. It's a specialized facility with highly trained and qualified staff and proper equipment, buildings designed specifically for the purpose of carrying out defensive testing relative to chemical and other warfare. All of which, Mr. Speaker, I as a Canadian, as a human being in this world, deplore having as a necessity, but it is a necessity in view of the fact that there are nations in the world that have stockpiled large quantities of these noxious and horrible weapons, too horrible to contemplate. But we must defend ourselves.
Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Minister, during the First World War, thousands of young Canadians lost their lives or were rendered respiratory invalids because of the use of mustard gas that we were not prepared for. So controlled testing is necessary. Can the Minister tell us if there is any incidents of injuries to wildlife, particularly our birds in that area, which should be sensitive to this type of testing?
As I've indicated to the members of the Assembly before, and I appreciate his thoughtful preface to his question, is that there were no damage to any wildlife or any human beings or any domesticated animals in the vicinity of these tests.
Main question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, the introduction, Mr. Speaker, yesterday of Bill 60 was a major disappointment to both the Francophone community and myself. Speaker, I saw the introduction of Alberta's Language Act as an opportunity for the province to gain so much from so many for so little. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the Premier and his members have wasted this opportunity as they have so many others in the past. To the Premier, why has the government decided not to take advantage of the money made available to the provinces of Saskatchewan from the federal government and also what be available to us to translate those laws which groups such as the Francophone Alberta community has requested? Why did we turn down the money?
Mr. Speaker, since I introduced the bill and since it will be a matter of debate in which I will participate, it was decided that Section 110 of the Northwest Territories Act, which had not been in use either in the Northwest Territories Act or in Alberta for a century with respect to legislation, was really redundant in terms of its application, and that to engage in the lengthy process of deciding which statutes should be translated into French as opposed to which might not, and so on, would be unwarranted and unnecessary, and given the nature of Alberta and the distinct nature of Alberta society.
Speaker, back to the Premier. Has the Premier off as to do to meet with Ottawa, Mr. Speaker, to gain or do in negotiations. Does not the Premier believe that there was a great deal more to be gained by giving up literally nothing and translating these laws into French than to create the unpleasant atmosphere that he now has between Ottawa and Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it isn't a case of giving up something, but it is a case of standing up for somebody. And what our government is doing is representing the people of Alberta. We will continue to do that.
Surely, Mr. Speaker, the more that we can bring to the bargaining table, the better chance of getting Senate reform, for instance. How is the Premier going to argue for Senate reform in Eastern Canada when he wouldn't even translate the laws into French at no financial cost to the people of Alberta? Where is his negotiating ability?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, this is not a matter of dollars and cents. Maybe to the honourable member it is, but this is a matter of this government representing the people of Alberta in the distinct society that we have in this province. And if the honourable member can be bought and allow something that Albertans feel very proud of, the way this province is, if you can buy him for a few dollars, that's fine. But you can't do it for this government.
Speaker, I'm flabbergasted. It has to be a weak government that thinks they're giving up something by translating laws in French. This is what Canada is about. Surely, Mr. Speaker, how can he expect to go to the bargaining table after having supported Meat Slate and hope to make deals with the rest of the provinces of Canada and the Canadian people for rights for Albertans when he won't give up the niggardly little measly bit of translating laws into French?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I come back to the honourable member's position that he's taking, and that is that somehow or other you sell out the way Albertans feel in some kind of a negotiating process. Well, we won't do that. If we feel that there's something should be done in Canada, we do it on its merits. We certainly don't look for those other things that the people of Alberta are proud of and stand up for and say, well, we'll sell this out in order to get that. We will not do it. I understand the honourable member's position that the Liberals would do that. We will not do it.
That's it. Honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon has exhausted his supplementaries. Yes. Athabasca Lac-La-Biche, followed by Calgary Northwest.
To the Premier, Bill 101 is before the Supreme Court. And if it is ruled unconstitutional in Quebec, whereby the Anglophone minorities are looking at making sure their rights are respected, are you going to be agreeing with Mr. Bourassa that he has the right to take away the Anglophone rights in Quebec like you did here in Alberta for the Francophones?
I'm sorry, Honourable Member, the question's out of order because it's hypothetical and it's also soliciting a question with regard to the linguistic issue. So, Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, the Leader of the Liberal opposition suggested that the monies coming from the federal House would not cost the people of Alberta any monies. Perhaps the Treasurer could allude to the member where the federal government obtains its money.
All right. Main question, member for Little Bow. Supplementary. Main question, Little Bow, followed by Calgary, Glenmore, Edmonton, Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development. It's with regards to Alberta companies being able to secure defence contracts in the province. And at the present time, there are very few that are secured by Alberta companies, and I think our capacity is much greater in terms of capability. My question, in order to qualify, Alberta companies must be certified by the federal government. Could the Minister indicate how many companies are certified and capable of taking defence contracts at this time?
Mr. Speaker, I'd have to take that question as notice because it would require us to determine the precise number of companies. But over the past few years, there has been a growing interest by Alberta companies in accessing the potential business that is available as a result of contracts being awarded by the federal government. And a number of companies have positioned themselves to respond to those opportunities. The honourable member is aware that the federal government has announced that there, over the next 15 years, that there will be a concerted effort to
see that this business is distributed across this country. It's early in that process. I think some $38 million in contracts have been awarded, and about 14% has been awarded to Western Canadian companies.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister in terms of his provincial responsibility. Could the Minister indicate what the Alberta government is doing to enhance the position of Alberta companies so that they can secure more of the federal contracts relative to defense expenditures?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps it would be useful to use a specific as an example of Alberta government support. The federal government recently awarded a $100 million contract to Frontec, which is an Alberta-based, Edmonton-based company. We worked very closely with the company over about a 2 or 3 year period in order to assist them in their presentations to the federal government. That's one example where a company has achieved success. There are a number of other companies, Mr. Speaker, that we are working with in a similar manner, either through our department or through the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, with the expectation that Alberta companies, because they have the capacity, will be successful in achieving contracts.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister indicate the type of assistance that's given? Is it in terms of financial assistance, or is it in terms of encouragement in putting themselves in position so that they can secure these defense contracts?
Again, Mr. Speaker, perhaps a specific example might be useful. GSR, an Edmonton-based company, has received significant financial assistance, as has Calgary-based company Edo. Other companies are well aware that our export loan guarantee program is available to Alberta-based companies to a maximum of $5 million in order that they might service contracts that they've been successful in winning. In addition to that, we provide introductions to federal officials of Alberta companies in terms of advising federal officials of the capability of Alberta companies, and that is done without favor to one company or another, but as a response to a request from Alberta-based companies.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary, and it's with regards to preparation for certain projected federal defense spending. If you look at the 1985 white paper of the federal government, they indicate in there that in the next year or 2 or 3 years, they hope to acquire the new main battle tank, which would be billions of dollars of expenditure to replace the current one that's in use. My question to the Minister, does the Minister take projects or objectives like that of the federal government and go out in a deliberate way and assist and prepare Alberta companies to try and meet the objectives of that type of contract?
Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, may wish to supplement my answer, but we believe that the role of the government is to be catalytic and supportive, and we continue to adhere to that role in that companies take the lead in terms of identifying projects or areas in which they feel they have the capacity to respond, and then we will assist them in being, as much as we can, to assist them in being capable of responding. But it is not our policy to take a position where Alberta says to a particular company, we think that you can do this, so you should go after it. Our principal method of pursuing access to these contracts is by being supportive of the initiatives of Alberta companies.
If I could just supplement the answer very briefly, I would like to indicate to the Honourable Member for Little Bow that very recently a very senior officer of the National Research Council has been out here and has met with me. The National Research Council in the area of technology has a program which is new, whereby they have identified two consultants in Alberta and are paying those consultants to coordinate certain relationships between the council and Alberta firms, and this has to do with advanced technology in the area of not only Canadian but also where they perceive to be U.S. markets. And Mr. Speaker, we are looking at areas of providing components where we have some strength in the technology now and where we could develop that strength. I think it is a very important initiative and a very good one. And I might also add, Mr. Speaker, that I have met with senior officers of the military establishment as well some months ago, looking over, having them look over our facilities in Alberta and to explain to us the possibility of their purchases in Alberta, not only for new material, but for servicing certain of the equipment they now have.
Westlawn Sturgeon.
Speaker, further to the aid that the provincial government does sometimes with guarantees to companies that are after defense contracts, and in particular maybe something like the grant to the Cardston munitions factory, does the government make any sort of audit or keep track of where these companies are selling their instruments of war or death-dealing activities, and make sure that it doesn't end up in Guatemala or San Salvador or some other area using the Alberta taxpayers' money?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member may have erred. The assistance provided to a munitions company was in Raymond, not in Cardston, and the company is manufacturing small arms ammunition for police forces, and that's an entirely different matter than the honourable member has raised.
Member for Calgary Glenmore, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I would like to commend the Premier commissioning Lou Hyman and his committee for this report and their promptness in producing this paper and addressing the concerns of nurses in hospitals and nursing home system. I would like to ask the Premier when these recommendations would be implemented by the government.
Mr. Speaker, thank the honourable member for raising this issue. The work of the Commission on such an important matter and in such an urgent way has been, my first look at this report has been very effective and excellent. The government will be dealing with the recommendations in here on a very quick path, fast-track basis. I hope we'll be able to assess the recommendations and move on them shortly. I would hope in a matter of weeks.
Mr. Speaker, could the Premier please outline the government's position with regards to the AARN's concept of E2000, which recommends and promotes the minimum registered nurses requirement of having a university degree?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must caution the honourable member that the government will want to respond to this report as a package rather than to individual recommendations within it, because I know that the Commission wanted it looked at as a package as well.
Is the Premier aware of any of these major issues, if they were brought up during the nurses' strike and addressed by UNA when the bargaining process was occurring?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that these matters are all matters that nursing groups and individual nurses who I met with were raised during the strike. So I believe that this gives us the basis for fulfilling our commitment, that we want to have the nurses in Alberta feel good about their role in the healthcare system, and we're going to work with them to make sure that that is the case.
Edmonton Centre, supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
will the Premier commit himself to meeting with the United Nurses of Alberta and the Alberta Association of Registered Nurses to get their specific feedback from these recommendations before government implements any of the recommendations?
Well, I can certainly assure the honourable member that the government will meet with any affected organizations regarding these recommendations.
Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Government House Leader and concerns certain aspects of government accountability. And I'm sure that he would agree with all of us that the freedom of speech in this Assembly is perhaps our most fundamental privilege. And I would like to know, on behalf of our lot anyway, Mr. Speaker, the government principles on the use of closure at the committee stage of a bill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are provisions in the standing orders, and Beauchesne deals extensively with them, to assure that every member of the legislature has an opportunity to speak in debate and to raise questions at the appropriate time, put motions on the order paper. Mr. Speaker, the standing orders and also Beauchesne also have rules which all members, I think, are familiar with, that apply in the instance where it is the government's decision that there has been undue delay by the process. And while it has not in the past been common to have that kind of delay or those particular provisions exercised in this Assembly, it is fairly common in some other assemblies. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, when there is considered to be a filibuster or other delay, then the closure provisions are applied here as they would be in other instances. We have had some in the judgment of the government, some illustration of undue delay.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's reply has a certain amount of sense to it on the face of it, but how can it apply to a committee stage of a bill before the opposition has had a chance to file any of its amendments, which can only be filed at that stage of the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not just sure how far this exchange is going to take us other than into debate, since obviously it's a matter of opinion. But as the Honourable Premier showed, there are already over 200 pages of Hansard dealing with the labour bills at this point in time, and that suggests that there has been a considerable amount of discussion. If the discussion has been on the wrong portion now, in the view of the Honourable Member, that's a judgment that will obviously require a focus later when we begin dealing with the balance of the committee time on Bill 22 or Bill 21 to focus on a priority.
Mr. Speaker, to change the area of accountability and to turn to debate in a more general sense, would the House Leader be prepared to remind his troops that it is not the custom of the House, one of the unwritten rules, as distinct from the written ones, to adjourn debate while there are still members ready and willing to speak before the time allotted is up, as happened last week?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the matter. The Honourable Member for Evans Strathcona has raised a different question, and that is under the provisions of the standing orders, which allow for private members' afternoon. That is up to private members, and the government does not, unless there is unanimous consent of the House, the government does not have any particular interest or influence in how the private members use that time. And I can assure the Honourable Member that the government does not have, as part of its program, use for that time unless it is given by unanimous consent.
Better control on the highway and in the House.
Turning to another area of accountability then, perhaps the government House leader would remind the ministers to see that the departmental reports that they must file are filed promptly instead of the average of a year or more that it takes at present. Mr. Speaker, in the responsibility of the House leader.
No, well, that's pretty vague, House Leader.
Well, very, very briefly, Mr. Speaker, the provisions are quite clear as to when reports are supposed to be filed, and if the honourable member has a problem about which I'm not familiar with, then I'd be happy if he would bring it to the government's attention, but otherwise it's covered by statute.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister indicate what routine will be used in handling the amendments? And in reference to the government ones, and there's the opposition ones, I think all three parties have amendments.
I'm sure the request can be made to the government House Leader once we get through question period rather than take the time of question period, but if that's the way you want to spend your time, so be it.
Mr. Speaker, very, very quickly, so as not to take more time, it is my intention, with unanimous consent today, to provide such that any member of the Committee of the Whole, which would be studying those bills, may speak as many times as there is time for that member or those members who wish to speak, and obviously any amendments by anyone can be brought before the Committee of the Whole.
Viking supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not sure where to direct this supplemental, whether it's to yourself or whether it's to the Treasurer, but I would like to ask on behalf of some of my constituents in reference to closure, if we could be informed of how much it costs to run the Legislative Assembly on a daily basis as it relates to a fact of misuse of the time that isn't productive in this Assembly.
The question is out of order. No questions can be directed to the Chair. Therefore, Edmonton Meadowlark, next main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is reported by the Provincial Lab of Public Health that in 1986 there were more than 11,000 cases in Alberta of sexually transmitted diseases involving chlamydia. This is a dreadful disease which, although apparently symptomless, can result in sterility and can affect newborn babies. To the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, is the incidence of chlamydia increasing, or is this reported number the result of improved reporting procedures?
It's a case of both, Mr. Speaker.
To the Minister, are commercial private labs required to report and track individuals and partners diagnosed as being infected by this disease?
Mr. Speaker, any physician in the province of Alberta is required by law to inform the local medical officer of health of a patient of theirs that has a reportable sexually transmitted disease.
Will the Minister be considering a procedure of routine testing for chlamydia, particularly for those people in high-risk groups?
Mr. Speaker, if the member is talking of mandatory testing, the answer is no.
I was not talking about mandatory testing, simply about including those in medical procedures with doctors and so on. Given that there is an increasing incidence of this disease, and in spite of whatever it is that the government is doing, could the Minister please inform whether he is paying special attention to this particular disease and to taking steps that could reduce its incidence?
All right. Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the answer is quite categorically yes. We have announced on April the 7th this year a virtual doubling in the amount of funding that the government is providing to reproductive health in Alberta. And at that time we announced that we would be increasing funding to all health units so that they would be able to deliver a sexuality education and counseling program within each health unit, And as well, we announced additional funding that would provide for the expansion of clinics for birth control counseling and sexually transmitted disease screening in Fort McMurray, Red Deer, and Lethbridge. This is in addition to the existing clinics that we fund through the health unit in Calgary and Edmonton.
Thank you. Additional time for question period has expired. Chair has been notified of one point of order. There's one bit of unfinished business from yesterday. Chair wonders if the Leader of the Opposition wishes to make some comment with regard to some statement made yesterday in question period.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I didn't realize that fraud was on parliamentary, but I see fraudulent is, so I withdraw the word fraud and I put in a parliamentary word called fraudulent, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Edmonton Belmont.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period today, the Premier, in the exchange with the Leader of the Opposition, said the word irresponsible. And perhaps what he was doing was reflecting the attitude of how Albertans feel about the bill and the use of closure on that bill. However, Section 320 of Beauchene, subsection 2, lists irresponsible as an unparliamentary term, and I would ask that that term be withdrawn.
Unfortunately, having checked the new edition, the member is indeed correct. The use of the word irresponsible. And having called, this is not a beer commercial, but having called for the blues, I see that the phrase was used, that's irresponsible opposition, and perhaps the Honourable Premier might withdraw that word, and in light of the previous apology, think of some other way to rephrase it.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'd rather withdraw the word and not go through that little act that we saw on the other side.
Thank you. Orders of the day. Government House Leader.